My name is Jerry Mitchell. I'm with the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, and our event tonight is co-sponsored by Millsaps College, and we're just so excited to be with you tonight. But first, we want to start with a short documentary that we'd like to share with you.
Schools, houses of worship, sidewalks, grocery stores, concerts, our nation's capital. It feels like no place is safe. The painful effects of domestic terrorism ripple through our country. Americans are left picking up the pieces and searching for answers.
I'd like to sit down with these people and one-on-one and have a conversation with them. Because I want to know, why are they so angry? Why do they hate so much? Because nobody comes in this world a racist.
Homegrown terrorism in the United States is on the rise. Within the last year, over 60% of domestic terrorist acts were motivated by white nationalism.
It's domestic terrorism that you need to be concerned with. It is domestic terrorism that we all need to understand.
We need to know our history so we won't repeat it.
Black Americans have been targeted by racially motivated violence since our nation's birth.
My name is Lisa McNair, and I am the younger sister of Denise McNair, one of the 4 girls killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in 1963. I always knew that I had a sister, and my sister was killed by white people because white people didn't like Black people.
On a summer Sunday in 1963, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair lost their lives in a violent attack on their place of worship.
They were killed because people didn't want a segment of our population to be able to vote, to integrate and go to school together.
The bomb was planted by 4 known Klansmen as an act of retaliation against the church, which was a known rallying point for the civil rights movement.
And I mean, there were people who were forever changed by those murders that day. My mom, my dad, never be the same, never.
In the wake of the violence, the community ached for justice.
Each one of these cases is a minor miracle.
14 years passed without any legal recourse. Robert Chambliss was convicted for the murder of Denise McNair in 1977. Andrew Sheldon worked as a jury consultant for the prosecution against 2 of the 4 bombers when the case was reopened in 2000.
Nobody expected any of these cases to be anything other than another acquittal.
During the civil rights era, Birmingham was a hotbed for Klan activity, and justice moves slowly when the system is rigged against people of color.
I mean, you don't sort of walk into the DA's office and say, I'd like to talk about prosecuting this case, because the DA is going to smile and then go to a Klan meeting. You know, so you take in your life in your hands to even ask for justice.
Former Senator Doug Jones served as the prosecutor in the 16th Street bombing cases when they were reopened. He came of age during the civil rights era, skipping classes to watch the first 16th Street case in 1977.
It was a really emotional announcement of the verdict. The most important thing is to try to give some kind of sense of healing for the family. It's not closure. I never use the word closure when it comes to these cases, but it does give a sense of healing.
After 38 years, the families of the victims were finally given a chance at peace.
And I just cried and cried and cried and cried. I just couldn't believe that finally, after all this time, we get to be treated right, you know?
What we learned in the Birmingham case was that there were new groups cropping up that called themselves Southern Pride groups, which is just an evolutionary term. You know, they didn't wear hoods. They wore, other things, perhaps combat fatigues, and trained in militia.
Just as during the civil rights period, white nationalists today feel threatened by the increased diversity and push for equality in our country.
It is fear that their way of life, whatever that might be, is going to be changed, and it's going to be a forced change on them. These 43 states that are filing all these voter suppression laws are fearful that they're going to lose political power. And when those two start feeding off each other, something bad's going to happen.
Instead of burning crosses under the cover of nightfall, white supremacists now meet online and flaunt their hatred in broad daylight.
And so the parallels to me are just striking.
It looks the same. If you studied that time and that period, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Klan today, all of that is the same. And what's also the same is they're being sanctioned by our government officials.
The recent attack on the U.S. Capitol is a sobering reminder of our not-so-distant past and how those in power perpetuate oppression.
You look into the number of law enforcement people, active law enforcement people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Examples are just all over the place. The way we look at ourselves as a country has got to change.
As our country stands now, we are a house divided, unable to reconcile with each other and with our collective history.
Well, the first thing is to somehow erase the assumption that we're in a post-racist world. So the second piece of it is we need to promote anti-racist behavior.
We really need to do more listening. We need to do what Atticus Finch said in To Kill a Mockingbird.
You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view.
Get in another man's skin and walk around in it for a while and see their things from their point of view. More of that has got to happen.
So think about who your best friends are. Now, are any of those people Black or people of color? If they are not, then your circle is too small. So you need to find people who are different from you and learn from them.
In America, we confront domestic terrorism regularly, and it leaves behind countless victims and grieving loved ones who are forced to reconcile with their loss.
Someone said once that we live parallel lives. Her murder has just always been a part of my life. She's in every aspect of my life. In a lot of ways, my life is representing her and making sure that she did not die in vain and that her memory is kept forever. So Denise is with me all the time.
All right. I think Rhonda wanted to say something. If she can, I don't know if she can be moved up or not. But anyway, if not, I'll keep talking. All right, I'll keep going. Anyway, as kind of the video, by the way, we want to give thanks to the Nora Hogan and Tora Looking and the NYU Carter Journalism Institute for the great work on this documentary. We want to thank them for that, and their fearless leader, Yvonne Laddie. And Rhonda moved up, so go ahead, Rhonda. You have to unmute yourself. So.
All right, there we are. Thank you all for joining us tonight and welcome to this special event for the Mississippi Center. You see already, you have heard from Jerry Mitchell, who brings us all together tonight, and you're in for a special treat because tonight we're inviting you to a discussion amongst famed investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell and some of his closest friends. And as you saw in this wonderful video, we are going to take a look tonight from the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, a very important moment in our civil rights history, to the January 6th attacks on the Capitol. You're going to hear tonight firsthand from some of the very brave folks who've been fighting domestic terrorism on the front lines, in newsrooms, in courtrooms. From the earliest days of the civil rights movement, they're going to share their experience and insights tonight. It's a particularly important moment to have this conversation. No doubt everybody in this Zoom room has been watching the unprecedented trial of Derek Chauvin. It's a very rare prosecution of a white police officer called to account, brought to trial for the murder of a Black man, George Floyd. It's the first trial ever to be broadcast publicly in Minnesota, and it is a very rare example of holding law enforcement, holding power to account. Many credit that cell phone video taken by a passerby with bringing the whole case to trial. But, you know, long before there were cell phones on the street, there were reporters, investigators, like our host here tonight, award-winning reporter Jerry Mitchell, dogged prosecutors like Doug Jones, who went on to become a US Senator. Many of you here already know Jerry, so you'll appreciate he modestly describes himself on Twitter, quote, investigative reporter, MacArthur Fellow, helped put 4 KKK members and serial killers behind bars. Jerry is indeed the author of Race Against Time, which tells of his remarkable career as a Mississippi newspaperman investigating and solving civil rights cold cases decades after law enforcement had given up. His work repeatedly makes national headlines. He's been honored by the MacArthur Genius Award, and he is the head of our Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting. Joining Jerry tonight is his good friend, Doug Jones, former Alabama Senator, who many here also know. As a reminder, he was the prosecutor who successfully prosecuted that case and put the Klansmen responsible behind bars. The story of how these two met, their lifelong friendship, and their no-holds-barred dedication to bringing the powerful to account is at the heart of the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting and what we are all about trying to accomplish. But we're also delighted to have with us some other very special distinguished guests, also friends of Jerry, but very important in this case. Civil rights activist and educator Lisa McNair, whose older sister was killed in the 16th Street bombing. And jury consultant Andy Sheldon, who played a key role in prosecuting not this case, but 7 other landmark civil rights cases. And last but not least, Bill Baxley, the youngest attorney general in the state of Alabama, who had the guts to reopen the case. And I hope later he'll tell you about the threats and pushback that he received when he decided to pursue it. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Jerry, and we are going to have some time for questions later from the audience.
Thanks very much. Appreciate Rhonda, who's chairs our board and does a great job. And yeah, so we're happy to have everyone here, and want to start off really talking about the church bombing. I mean, I think it's rarely, the Klan's attack on this church has rarely been called terrorism, but that's what you called it, Doug, in your closing arguments. Yeah. And why did you use those words out of curiosity? Which wasn't that long after 9/11, by the way. I thought was very fascinating.
You know, what's interesting, Jerry, is that we had, you know, the 2 cases. The Blanton case was in May of 2001, and then Cherry was in May of 2002. And so you had 9/11 that happened in between. And it was in the Blanton case where I talked about this being an act of domestic terror, an act of terrorism. I didn't use the term domestic terrorism.
Yeah, you said terrorism.
Just terrorism, because that's what it was. It were folks trying to affect a political change or agenda, to try to change the political dynamics. By this time in 1963, the Klan was seeing their segregated way of life sliding away, and they did not like it. The fire hoses and the dogs had put a spotlight on the church and the children, but they settled all of that, and Birmingham became a city where Jim Crow laws were starting to go away. The I Have a Dream speech occurred in August, and the whole segregation movement was dissolving before their very eyes, and they were not happy. And the only way that the Klan could figure out how to change that, since they were losing the political, was to use violence.
Right.
And that's what happened.
And that's kind of was the history of that, right? The 50s, they tried to fight it every which way they could fight it, you know, like white citizens councils and all those other various efforts. Oh, we're gonna pass laws that we don't have to obey.
Right.
We're going to pass laws that say we don't have to obey the U.S. Supreme Court, or we're going to pass laws we don't have to obey this law, or whatever it is.
Nullification, interposition, all of those terms that they use. But ultimately, when that was going away, they had no choice but to submit to violence.
Exactly.
They bombed houses in Birmingham. You know, Dr. King's brother.
How many bombings are we talking about? How many bombings are we talking about?
Over the course of 1520, there were well over 40 bombings in the Black neighborhood in Birmingham. So many that Birmingham became known as Birmingham, and the one in particular area known as Dynamite Hill.
Unreal. And Lisa, your family throughout this, I mean, I just admire you so much. I just want you to know that I love you too, and just what y'all went through and what you have meant as a leader, as a person. I know you may not know this about Lisa, but she regularly meets with high school students that come to kind of learn more about the civil rights movement. And she speaks very candidly and openly about her feelings and her thoughts and what her family went through. But talk about what that, you know, that event, because it was literally shockwaves, not just throughout Birmingham, but throughout the world.
Right, exactly. Actually, I wasn't born when Denise was killed. She was the only child, and I was born almost a year to the day that she was killed. But it was a pivotal event for the city, for the country, for the whole world. The people of Wales donated a stained glass window in honor of the girls to the church. So it has been something that, you know, has been our family's whole life, that sorrow and that pain. The loss of having lost my sister, me having a sister I never got to know, I never got to meet. It's tragic that it took the killing of 4 little girls for people to say, hey, maybe we should say more about the evil that we already know is going on, but we've just let slide. It's sad that it took that to wake up, and sad that it took the George Floyd thing for people to wake up. We just need to stay woke.
That's an interesting point, you know, because, you know, Dr. King said the same thing. You know, the whole crux of his Birmingham letter, you know, letter from the Birmingham jail, was that good people had stayed quiet, right? That they weren't willing to speak out, right, against these things that were going on. And
there's a lot of that going on now too.
So Mr. Baxley, Bill Baxley prosecuted this case back in 1977, prosecuted a guy named Dynamite, whose nickname was Dynamite Bob Chambliss. And God bless you, Mr. Baxley. You know, you're one of my heroes. I appreciate what you've done so much. But what made you decide to take that case on? I mean, you were living in Alabama. You knew things that were going on at that time. I mean, what prompted you to take that on?
Bill's on mute.
Okay, you got to take your mute off there, Bill. You got to take your. Hang on a second here. Let's see if it'll let me. Can you take him off mute? I guess he. Well, all right.
Yeah, Bill doesn't know how to use a cell phone now.
Yeah, I know.
Really challenging him to get him
God
off.
bless him. God bless him. Oh, look at him. He's got to go get some help.
He's got to go get Marie.
You got to get some help. While we're waiting, Doug. Yeah, I know. That's okay. Doug, tell about, you got to attend that trial in 77. And why? How did you wind up there? What were you? I thought you were supposed to be in law school.
I was in law school. I was a second-year law student at the Cumberland School of Law here in Birmingham. But at the University of Alabama, I'd had an opportunity to spend the day with former Supreme Court Justice, now the late Supreme Court Justice, William O. Douglas. And when I asked him advice about what it would take to be a good trial lawyer, he said, go watch trials, watch good lawyering. Well, the Chambliss case was the trial of the century. And Bill had been one of my heroes. It's just the way he conducted himself and the progressive way he handled the Alabama Attorney General's office. So I did. I cut classes. I sat in the balcony and watched an amazing trial unfold in front of me. Some amazing lawyers. Saw Bill's closing argument, which to this day was one of the greatest I've ever seen. And that when that jury convicted Chambliss, you could just feel the sense of history. You could feel the sense of relief. And you understand that lawyers can do good things. And that's what we're there for. And it really instilled in me a sense of purpose. There's no question. Never dreaming, Jerry, never, ever dreaming that 24 years later, I would not only try the case that Bill couldn't get to try, but also do it in the same courtroom where I watched as a kid. It's a pretty amazing journey for me.
That's amazing. And Mr. Baxley, we got you off mute now. What made you decide to take this case on? I mean, there wasn't like all the people in, Alabama were clamoring, white folks were clamoring for this. So what made you decide? It was kind of political suicide in a lot of ways.
Jerry, I was beginning my senior year in law school in September of '63 when the bomb went off. And it had been a year where there'd been a lot of bad things that happened, momentous things also. Medgar Evers had been killed earlier that year. In June, Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door to try to block 2 students from being admitted. They were admitted by when President Kennedy federalized the National Guard. I watched that episode out of the window of the law school, which was about less than, I'd say, 50 yards from the entrance to the auditorium where they were. So I got a bird's eye view of it. In August, Dr. King had to march on Washington and made that wonderful I Have a Dream speech. And then in September, this bomb went off and the 4 little girls were killed. And I remember exactly where I was. I was at my fraternity house getting ready to have lunch and watch Sunday afternoon football. Came over the news and I was riveted to the news, and then they announced there'd been some deaths, and then 4 little children were dead, maybe others. So I couldn't eat and was practically physically ill the rest of the day. And that night I made a little vow to myself that I wanted to do something about that. This stuff had gone on, was terrible, and this was the worst part of it. Of course, you got to understand what I envisioned doing. At that time, it never occurred to me that I'd have any position to do anything of substance. I envisioned going, possibly hoping that the feds, FBI would make a case, and I was going, if necessary, to drop out of school for a while and go up there and volunteer to write briefs, tote briefcases, bring hot dogs, cigarettes, Cokes, whatever, tote law books. And that's what I envisioned when I meant I wanted to do something.
Yeah.
A, the feds never did make a case.
No, they never did.
And then B, within almost a little less than 7 years after that, at a very young age, I had been lucky enough to be elected Attorney General of Alabama. And that is a position that in fact, the #1 position where you can do something about something like that, because the Attorney General is the chief prosecutor in the state. So the night before I took office, they had issued me a badge and some other a certificate of election and all that, including, this was before we had 800 numbers. They had a card that had a bunch of numbers you'd be using, you could call. And so I took that card out and I remembered what I had vowed to myself about wanting to do something to help. And I sat down, and in the corners, 4 corners of that card, I wrote one of those little girls' names in each corner. But I wanted every day that I used it, I knew I'd be using it often, I wanted to be reminded that one was going to be my main goal for being Attorney General. And so soon after we got in there, we reopened it. This was in early '71. And it didn't get public till we started issuing grand jury subpoenas, which was 4 or 5 years after that. And then we were able to bring Chambliss to trial in 77. He was the ringleader. We only got the one indictment against, the indictments, we got 4 indictments, separate indictments for each little girl against Chambliss. And can I add the kind of my favorite part of the story about Doug?
Sure.
The biggest regret that I had in my entire career was that I left office. We convicted Chambliss, the jury convicted, when he was the ringleader, but there were 3 others that I knew had done that bombing. And after I left office, nobody would touch it with a 20-foot pole. And so I had regrets often of 20 years that I knew those people that had killed those girls were walking around and nobody was doing anything, and I hadn't been able to do anything. What I didn't know at the time, but learned later, was there was that kid in law school in Birmingham cutting classes every day. 20 years later, Doug Jones was the U.S. attorney, and that kid that watched that trial stepped up and took over and convicted the only 2 that were still alive, and they died in Alabama prison. So Doug will always be one of my heroes.
Thank you. And Doug, I still remember that day well. We got together I came over and we met the first time.
Yeah.
And it was and found out you're a big New York Yankees fan. So you got
that was we were meeting with a lot of journalists, people coming over, but your story right there in particular, Jerry, got picked up on wire services, and it prompted a witness to come forward. One of the ex-wives of, I say one of, he was like married 5 or 6 times, I think. And it was like wife number 3, I believe. And, it prompted her. She had vanished. Nobody could find her. And she saw your story in a little hometown newspaper in Glendive, Montana, and picked up the phone and called the FBI agents. And she provided some really damning testimony about Cherry's admissions. That was the key in the Cherry case, was the admissions that he made a little bit himself at the time about being involved with this group and where he was the night before and who he saw. But mainly it was the admissions later on where he admitted to his ex-wife, one of her brothers, and several people where he admitted being part of the group that bombed the church and killed those girls. Yeah.
And you guys did a great job. I mean, you and of course, Andy Sheldon, jury consultant, worked with you on it. And that whole team, Doug, you guys had a great team. And if you haven't read Doug's book, Bending Toward Justice, it's excellent. Does an excellent job of kind of capsulizing, everything. I don't know if you're like me, Doug, and writing a book like this about, of course, I was trying to put 4 cases in it. I wrote twice as much as I needed the first go around.
I had 3 times as much as
Did
I
you?
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it was one of those things you felt like you needed to put all of this thing down.
Exactly.
And for posterity, because it's,
you've done a great job with it.
All things come around, as we were seeing in that video. Things come around, and you need to remind people of what happened in the 50s and 60s so that we can challenge those who are letting it happen today.
Yeah. What about that, Andy? I mean, do we see this coming back around? What are we seeing?
Ask me the question again.
I said, do we see this coming back around, with the Birmingham, we're talking about the Birmingham church bombing. We're talking about terrorism. Do we see this coming back around now?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever gone away.
Mm-hmm.
I think the notion of terrorism is and that the Klan was so good at, was to instill fear in as many people as they could, hopefully all African Americans, because they wanted to eliminate those people from their environment. So they were good at it. It's just continued, right on through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and here we are.
Yeah. And Lisa, I know during the trial, you and your family, on all the trials, you and your family were on the front row, as well as other families. And why was that important to you? I mean, what were in terms of that? because you guys were there every day. I mean, just every second, every day, right there.
It was just important to see justice finally being done, to just observe every part of the trial and the evidence, and to hear things that we didn't even know. You know, we knew these people were guilty, but why they were guilty and how they were guilty, and to honor Denise. So it really meant a lot to be there to see them get convicted.
And what was that?
Hey, Jerry.
Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead, Doug.
I want to add, it wasn't just important for them, it was important to the prosecution. Because at the end of the day, while we all, with our team, Bill's team did the same thing. We all carried the burden of history on our shoulders about these cases. But we had to approach these cases as if it was a murder trial, because at the end of the day, it was about those children, and it was about those families. And it was about those that had lost their loved ones, who had never seen the full measure of justice, a system of justice that had let those folks down so much in the 1960s, that it was really about them. And we had to stay focused on that. So the presence of those families as a constant reminder of the loss was extremely important for us in our jury.
And you know, you could tell at the end when the verdict, I was there for the verdict of the Cherry trial. So it was the last one. And after the judge read the verdict, I just cried and we hugged each other as families. But what I will never forget was I looked up at the prosecution team and they were weeping.
Yeah, they were crying.
And that just meant so much to me, that it was bigger than just us. It was justice for all of us Americans, all of us human beings. It was one.
That was a powerful moment. I remember that very well.
Jerry?
Go ahead, Andy. Chime in.
You asked me the question about, is it coming back around? And Martha Cook posted a question saying that did we know that the CDC declared racism a serious public health problem? And I had not heard that, but that makes terrific sense to me. I've always thought, because of my background in psychology, I've always looked at racism as a mental health issue. I think to think that is crazy, you know, just plain and simple.
Right.
You know, that's all.
No, that's an excellent point. And I guess, I think, Doug, what you said after the verdict came in, I remember it so distinctly, was justice delayed. I'll let you do the quote because I don't want to botch it, but
well, it essentially, justice delayed doesn't have to be justice denied. We were able to achieve a measure of justice. You know, that quote, "Justice delayed is justice denied," really was essentially saying there's an injustice in the delay, and there's no question that there was a sense of injustice. But at the end of the day, a jury in Birmingham, 2 occasions, juries in Mississippi on 3 or 4 and more occasions, decided that justice delayed was not going to be justice denied. And it took new generations of prosecutors. It took a new generation of jurors who could fairly judge the evidence on all of these cases. And I think it was so important to understand that it's just never, ever too late for that. Bobby DeLauder said that in his book. It's just never too late to do the right thing, to seek that truth and to seek that justice.
So talk about, you worked on the Rudolph case, Doug, and so did Andy. Y'all worked on the Rudolph case. Talk about that and kind of follow us, take it forward from there. What you guys saw in the Rudolph case and what you maybe seen since.
Well, what I saw in Eric Rudolph was a hater, just like Bobby Cherry and Tommy Blanton and Robert Chambliss. They were blinded by the hate of people that didn't look like them or talk like them or worship like them. And Rudolph was no different. He had bombed the Olympic parks because, as the ATF agent said, this was the conglomerate. This was where the world and all of the races were coming together to celebrate. And he couldn't stand it. And then he also hit a couple of, at least one abortion clinic and a gay nightclub in Atlanta before coming over to Birmingham with the clinic that performed abortions here in the state of Alabama. And it was, you know about a remarkable series of circumstances that led to his conviction. It was amazing what happened with an 18-year-old UAB freshman student that helped identify him. He and a lawyer that was having breakfast at McDonald's at the time that helped ultimately identify Eric Rudolph, who stayed hidden for 5 years before he was finally apprehended dumpster diving. But again, Eric Rudolph was trying to change a political dynamic. In this case, in Birmingham, it was women's health and reproductive rights. He wanted to change that. He was opposed to that. And he felt compelled to violence to try to make that change. Just another sense of domestic terrorism, just like Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, which kind of interesting to me when that news first broke. I'm sure everybody remembers it. You know, CBS, I think, had the logo that said "Terror in the Heartland," and they had this expert they put on. It was like, "Hey, we can tell this is foreign terrorists, you know, because of the way they bombed the building," and and then of course the John Doe 1 and John Doe 2 drawings came out a few days later, and then they're like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah, anything but. In fact, a former member of the United States military.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just it stopped being terrorism when it was some white guys that did it, apparently, you know, which makes no sense because it's still terrorism. So
I think Jerry, that narrative is changing a little bit now, though.
I do too.
I think that by and large, and we had this come up, that by and large it does change sometimes when victims tend to be minorities and people don't see it as terrorism. But I think more and more the country after George Floyd, after Breonna Taylor, after what we're witnessing on January 6th, people are beginning to understand. No one could look and see what happened on January 6th at the United States Capitol and say that that was not some form of domestic terrorism.
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think's motivating that change?
Take a stab at that, Doug.
You know, it's a good question, Andy. And I think a part of it is just, we see it so often now. We see it more. You don't pick it up and read it on a piece of paper or see it in a quick blurb. It is a constant news story, and people see that a little bit more. But I also think that the demographics of the country are changing as well. The demographics of the South are changing as well. This country is becoming ever more diverse, and they see things in a different way. And I think that has to be part of the dialogue. Make no mistake, we've still got the folks here that just doesn't see it that way. But I think that is a population that is shrinking if we can just continue to have the dialogues that we've talked about so much between, you know, the two of us over the years.
And Lisa, I certainly wanted to bring you into this discussion about, you mentioned, I thought it was real striking on the video that we saw, you wish you could sit down and talk to, you know, if you were going to sit down and talk to somebody, what would you say? So people that are, you know, inclined to hate or inclined to carry out this kind of violence, what kind of conversation would you have with them?
Just like any conversation I'd have with anybody. I think you have to get to know people, like Doug said, have the conversation, one human being to another human being. And let's be clear, I probably talk to racists all the time. I mean, I know a lot of white people and I'm around white people all the time. And some of them may not be as outwardly racist as they think they are, you know, and they would just like cringe if I said, "Hey, you're a racist." But some things they support, I will talk to them about how that hurts me, that offends me. You know, I have some white people who say, "Oh, well, you're not like the others," or "I like you." I mean, yeah, but okay, so how about there's like millions of other Black people like me that you don't happen to know? Would you wish ill will toward them? That would be just like wishing ill will toward me. So I think conversations with them at one-on-one, like my daddy always used to say, we're all human beings, to understand who we are as human beings. You know, would you want what's happening to me to happen to you, to happen to your grandkids, to happen to your kids? You know, if you were in this spot, no, you wouldn't. So how can you course correct and think differently? So I really hate that Bobby Blanton got away and he died. and I didn't get a chance to talk to him. I really would have liked to have spent some time sharing with him and just to see. I mean, he might have been blocked up and just done, but
Lisa,
maybe
I met with him 4 times.
Yeah.
I met with Tommy Blanton before we indicted him. I met with him after I convicted him. I met with him twice in prison, including one time just within a month before he was coming up for parole. He had ice water in his veins. He had no remorse whatsoever, would never acknowledge anything. I just don't know if those old Klansmen were warm-blooded animals. He had nothing. And we had a civil conversation. We really did. We had a civil conversation. But to get him to admit what he did and to talk about it, even in the face of potentially getting paroled, he still refused. So I know you would like to. It would never have happened. And you'd have walked away like I did, really disappointed.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second, if
do.
I may, Jerry. Just we're getting
Please
a lot
do.
of great questions from the audience.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I want to just read a couple because it's clear people are really following along here. We
Go
have
ahead.
several questions about jury selection that I think we'll set for Andy.
Yeah.
Andy, people want to know, are there any new trends or considerations you're seeing in jury selection in this age of having the evidence broadcasted across the nation? Is there a type of person who's the ideal juror for a civil rights case now? What does that person look and sound like? And obviously, if this is with the Derek Chauvin case, one of the first times the public could be present during jury selection. What do you think?
Well, it's fascinating. I happen to be a radical individualist, which means that I need to know what each person thinks, what their attitudes are, before I can tell you very much about the way they might be inclined to vote one way or the other. But we had done a community attitude survey in Blanton and Cherry. And so we had some pointers, some attitudes that we knew that if people had, they'd be more inclined to be prosecutorial jurors than not. For example, one of the attitudes was they felt extremely positive about Dr. King and Reverend Shuttlesworth. That was an indication of something we thought was valuable. They believed the bomb was meant to kill a lot of people. That was helpful if people thought that. Whereas, if we ask a question that if there was a fill in the blank question on one of our questionnaires, it said, if your son or daughter brought home a person of another race for dinner, what would you think? We would get answers like, never happened. And then we'd get other answers like, what's the problem? I don't see a problem there. So pretty quickly you get an idea of where people are leaning. So that's helpful. I would say that I have a long view. I don't see a lot of trending. I don't see a lot of changes. I think I've become pretty good at listening to people and listening to what they feel in their hearts. And I just, over time, Doug will tell you, you get pretty adept at saying, no, this person's not going to be on my jury. There's no way.
We're not seeing a lot of trials either. That's something new and different. We're just not seeing a lot of trials.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we have a question here for Lisa. Lisa, is there something that you saw civil rights attorneys and organizations doing in the 1960s for victims and their families that you wish were still happening now? If we could rewind, is there something you wish civil rights attorneys or organizations had done differently in the wake of the church bombing and your sister's death?
Ooh, that's a deep question.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, I wasn't born then, so I was a kid. So I'm assuming that they did the best that they could at the time. You have to think about the laws that were in place, the limited number of African Americans who were able to vote. So therefore, there were so few being able to be on juries at that time. So just, the time wasn't right for that. I'm sure that they did the best that they could do at the time.
What about personally, Lisa? Did you feel like people came to your support?
Oh yeah, I think, everybody here in Birmingham has been this really, really supportive. Really, it's funny. Even some of the people who would say some ugly stuff when they think about the four little girls being killed. I mean, it's a crushing thing that nobody wants to have any happen to anybody. And so people have just been very supportive. And of course, Doug and his team, they were just magnificent. But time, that was, 30 years later, when they came around,
They,
and they were great, but we couldn't get that before. Couldn't get
they,
that right after.
those folks weren't that supportive at the time.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, the new mayor of Birmingham at the time, famously said, with tears in his eyes, we are all victims. Well, that's just horse hockey. They
Yeah,
weren't
pretty
all
much.
victims. There was a specific victims in that. And so there's been this narrative about the white guilt that came after this bombing and after the fire hoses and the dogs. And we need to change that narrative, because it wasn't a white guilt that changed things. It was the courage of the children. It was the death of these girls. That's what started changing America. It wasn't white guilt that did it. And Sarah Rudolph was a survivor that day. And she will tell you she didn't get hardly any support. And it still suffers from that trauma today for the lack of the support she got. Birmingham wanted to just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
My cases, Bill's cases, a lot of support, huge support by the time we
Right,
prosecuted
right.
ours. No question about it, but not in the day.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we have a question for Jerry. Jerry, your journalism clearly played a big role at the time. What are some of the stories you're working on now that might lead to similar results?
Well, we're working on some other cold cases, believe it or not. One of them is there was a gay bar in New Orleans that was it was torched and more than 30 people killed in 1973. So we actually have our Justice Squad working on that case. We're working on healthcare access. Mississippi is one of a dozen states that has yet to expand Medicaid in terms, and of course, Mississippi is the poorest state, in terms of income. It's the most impoverished state in the nation. So those are among plus domestic violence, especially against women of color, which takes the lives of so many women. And there's just very little public discussion about it, which is kind of shocking. And nor much done, to be honest. It's just treated as like, well, it happens. That's kind of the attitude. So those are among the various things that we're doing right now, and want to continue to make a difference. I mean, I think I applaud Doug and Andy and Lisa and Mr. Baxley, their courage. I mean, I think that's those are the examples we need of just people standing up and being willing to do the right thing and call for justice where it's needed.
Jerry, in that regard, I've listened to people talk about walking in the shoes of the other guy, but I got to say, I'm going a different way. The older I get, the more radical I get, I think. Really, I mean it. Anti-racism really appeals to me. If I hear somebody say something racist, I'm in their face.
Yeah.
It's just over. I've just had enough. So anyway, just say that.
It's an interesting point.
I'd like to ask, my question is, we've just been through an era where we've seen this tremendous adversarial relationship between the press and power and the fake news allegations. And here we've got a group of colleagues where the investigative reporter, the prosecutor, the citizen activist, you all seem to be in this together. And I'd be interested for you all to talk a little bit about where the role of the reporter came into play here, and how you've all remained friends, and the little bit of behind the scenes story there.
We need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, we really had a relationship with Jerry, but also some of the local reporters as well, because there were certain things that we couldn't say and we couldn't do, but yet we had a relationship enough that we trusted the reporters, And it helped us develop leads. I mean, we were able to seek out and get investigative leads through some of the things that Jerry was doing and some of the others. And I will tell you, quite frankly, I am so disturbed that we don't see good investigative journalism as much anymore. Jerry and the Mississippi groups are doing a great job, and I applaud that. But there are so many things that are going on in this country right now that I think that a dogged reporter could uncover about politicians, about corruption, you name it. That we are seeing that get tamped down. Resources aren't there. I had this discussion just last night. We've got another political scandal in Alabama, and it's almost like so many people are just lazy and they want somebody to spoon feed them a story. And Jerry was dogged. The things that he did in trying to interview Cherry and got Cherry to make admissions was huge for us. It was a big deal for us. The Willadine Brogdon, story where she saw this newspaper article and called us to talk about Cherry. Those are the kind of relationships that you need to have, but it's built on one of trust, and you got to recognize everybody's role. And that's what we've seen in the last 4 years. The press is not there to support a public official or a prosecution. They're there to support the truth and to get that out regardless. And you got to have a mutual respect. That's also been eroded from our public officials these days.
Hey, go ahead, Mr. Baxley. Do you want to say something?
I agree with what everybody is saying and thinking about the wonderful journalists and the cooperation, the sometimes competition. But the truth of the matter is now there's just no jobs for journalists. We don't have any newspapers except a handful to hire investigative reporters.
Yes.
There's certain others that are finding a little niche, but it's not like it was. It's
right.
Very, very different. Very few openings for investigative reporters.
And that's why, Mr. Baxley, we're trying to do what we're doing. And we have a nonprofit and we're raising money, and Ian Isaac's doing a great job with that, and just trying to, essentially raise money so we can do investigative reporting like you're talking about and Doug's talking about.
Jerry Mitchell's and foundations like yours around, like they were newspapers in the past.
Well, there need to be more. I mean, I'd love to see one of these in every state, and hopefully more than that, more, for the bigger towns, obviously bigger cities, one for each one of those.
And Jerry, it wasn't just you in our case.
I agree.
Bill had a friend, Jack Nelson, who was LA Times.
Yeah, I know. I knew Jack well.
Bill, you can tell this story about, going up there and visiting with Jack and telling him your case was dead, and because you weren't getting any cooperation from the Department of Justice. And then Jack Nelson took over. Pick it up there, Bill.
Well, if it hadn't been for Jack, we never could have made our case. Jack is from Alabama. He and I were friends. Yep. And Jack was, I suppose, for 30 years, the Los Angeles Times bureau chief in Washington. And so I visited with him whenever I'd go to Washington. We were out one evening, and Jack said, "You still working on your bombing case where little girls were killed?" I said, "Well, I think we've really solved it, but we're going to have to close it up because we can't cross-check what we're finding out because the FBI just will not cooperate with us." And so he asked me what I meant, and I explained it all. Said the steps I'd gone through had been 4 or 5 years since I'd asked for them to come in and share what they had. And he said, "Well, you think that maybe I could help shake something loose?" And I said, "I don't know, but anything you could do would be better than where we are now." So he said, "All right, I got something I might try." It's okay. So I went back to the hotel. Next morning, phone rang, and it was Jack. He said, "You had your coffee yet?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You still want me to try to do something to get the FBI to work with you on the case?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." I said, we will shut down if they don't." And he said, "All right, I just want to make sure that you felt the same way after you had your coffee that you did when you had 4 or 5 beers." So he called me a few days after that, a week or so, and said, I think you're going to be hearing something pretty soon. I think you'll like it. And so I reckon another 10 days, 2 weeks, phone rang one day. I was out of the office and they called me and said, the FBI agent in charge in Birmingham's calling you. I called. He said, Mr. Baxley, said, this request you've got pending for us to get with your investigators on the church bombing case, said, we would like to work out a thing with you. And he acted like it was just something that was just pending a few days. It's been pending 5 years. And sure enough, now they did not ever do their definition and my definition of cooperation is 180 degrees apart.
Yeah, a little different.
And,
Yeah.
and many things I learned after Doug's case started that I didn't know that if we could have known would have been a big help, because Doug didn't have that problem because he was U.S. attorney.
Yeah, I was gonna say the U.S. attorney, so didn't have to worry about that. Hey, I know
We got a question here that's music to our ears, Jerry. To talk about the impact of investigative reporting, can it really make a difference? Are there opportunities to develop narratives that would move the country forward? This is always the question for reporters.
Yeah,
can it have an impact?
Well, I mean, I think so. I think that these cases are evidence of what journalism can do. My friend Hank Klibanoff likes to say that almost every one of these cases, there were 24 convictions in these cases, and basically virtually every case, there was a journalist who did reporting of some sort, investigative reporting of some sort that led to either the reopenings or furthering of the prosecutions. So it played an incredibly important role in these cases, but I think beyond that as well. I mean, we've certainly seen it historically and continue to see it. I mean, Bob Woodward, is still reporting, and we still see some excellent reporting that he did about what the president was saying about, oh yeah, this is terrible, this is horrible disease, and then publicly saying something completely different, So it's incredibly important what we do, and to shine a light on what, into the darkness, and it does change things. We've been reporting about healthcare access. The Mississippi legislature, for the first time, and I think, and since I can remember, actually had a discussion about Medicaid expansion. They've never even discussed it. They've never even really had a discussion about it. So I think, writing about these things does make a difference and help move the needle and help bring change. I've seen it over and over again in this state for sure. And I know elsewhere as well.
Jerry, if we could change campaign finance laws and you could follow the money, you could damn sure make a change in this country.
That's one of the worst U.S. Supreme Court rulings in history, which was when they defined money as speech.
Right.
Because up until that point, there had to be reporting. Like, yeah, someone can dump however much money into a campaign, but it got reported, and then at that point they said, no, money is speech. And, and so therefore following the money trail just got a lot more difficult.
I'd like to say something to
Please do, Andy.
Close my closing comment to enter into this love fest we're having.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I have, in 40 years of being a trial consultant, I've spent a lot of time with lawyers because that's primarily who I'm working with, and jury selection is really a minimal part of it. But I have to say that working with Doug Jones was the preemie experience. I remember sitting on the floor of his office. We're going over photographs, trying to figure out what the story is we're going to tell. And Doug is just after it, Let's do this, let's do that. And I mean, he's such a terrific strategist. I don't think, Senator Jones, that I've ever worked with a better lawyer.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the whole team did a great job, Doug. I mean, the whole team, and all the different things that you guys came up with, or like on Sherry, about the being able to use the Blanton statement, Blanton's wife's statement, the kitchen tape, that whole thing.
And the Cherry statement, the fact that he had made a 2.5-page written statement to the FBI that put him squarely at the modern sign shop with with Blanton and with these folks where he had denied all of this stuff, and the help that you gave us to prove that he lied to the FBI about where he was that night, the various lies that he had given. You know, it was just a really great dedicated team of both investigators with Bill Fleming and Ben Heron.
Yeah, Ben, they deserve some credit.
Robert Posey gave as good a closing argument as Bill Baxley did, one of the greatest I've ever heard. Don Cochran, Jeff Wallace. And you know, Jerry, one of the things that often gets overlooked that Jeff Wallace helped us do.
Yeah, Jeff.
Being here in the Bible Belt, it wasn't just that the 4 girls were the victims in the case. That church was a victim. We knew that there is a spiritual connection with people had to their houses of worship. So our first exhibit was the church. It was not one of the girls, but that church became as much of a victim as those 4 girls and the 5th girl, Sarah.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to have to jump in here since our time.
We're going to have to shut it down. They're shutting us down.
But first, I want to say thank you to this amazing panel. And having a front row seated history like this is a very rare thing. And it's a tribute to all of you that you are all still here shoulder to shoulder and sharing these great stories with us. There's no better way to learn these lessons, as Lisa is reminding us. And I hope in our audience tonight, I know we have a lot of students. I hope we've got aspiring lawyers, journalists, investigative reporters, educators, activists who've been inspired by what can really be accomplished here. And, you know, Jerry is sort of modest when he talks about the impact of his reporting, but the Mississippi Center was formed especially because of all the papers and what we've been talking about. Investigative reporters have been shut out at every turn. But, you know, it's so important to have a source of news and investigative news in particular. So there's a lot of projects going on at the Mississippi Center that affect everybody. And you can see all this great work not only on the website at MCIR.com, Jerry, I think that's
MississippiCIR.org.
MississippiCIR.org. But you will also notice that this reporting is given away for free and available to newspapers all around the country, broadcasters, newspapers. It's out there for everyone. And that is sort of the magic of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we'd be delighted if everyone who had a good time tonight and enjoyed the discussion takes a look at the website, supports us, and stay tuned because I know Jerry's got some very big stories to drop that are coming. So a pleasure to have you all, and thank you to everybody. And Jerry, I'll let you have the final words.
Well, that's it. Just thank you on behalf of Rhonda and Ian and the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting and our managing editor, Deputy Skipper, and Anne-Marie Cunningham, who's running our journalism lab. I just want to thank you and Millsaps as our co-sponsor. And, you know, and please help us continue to make a difference, not only Mississippi, but the South and the nation. And that's the kind of reporting we want to do that continues to make a difference. And thank you, Lisa and Doug and Andy and Mr. Baxley. We can't thank you enough for coming. You're our heroes, and thank you so much for coming with us. And thank you for everyone who came and listened. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. Everybody have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Some good questions in Q&A, Jerry.
Yeah, I know.